Say that the main message is really a reiteration of what we said back in December, which is that Nigeria is at a critical juncture. In fact, a critical juncture in its six-decade history. And at this point, the government, the business, political, other elites really, and the Nigerian people need to reach a consensus about the way forward. The COVID crisis was like a wake-up call. And that, as a result of that, the government pushed through a number of really bold reforms. Our main message now, 6 months later, is that the momentum on those reforms needs to be sustained. They remain as urgent, in some ways even more urgent, because of some things that have happened, such as the rising prices, the high levels of inflation, and the high levels of insecurity in the country. So for Nigeria to realize its potential, to have the economic opportunities for all its young Nigerians coming of working age, I think that momentum of the reforms that the government started in 2020 needs to continue. I would say that's our main message.
Yeah, thank you very much. That sounds very optimistic. But the title of this report, Shubham, very quickly, is about resilience through recovery. Define that for me, those two key words, resilience through recovery. How did you arrive at that title?
So the resilient part is that, the global economy, while it seems to be on an upward trajectory, there will continue to be fluctuations and shocks and disruptions. Locally, we don't quite know yet what will happen with the COVID pandemic. We hope that things will get much better. So the economy needs to be resilient to withstand those shocks. But in the middle of that, withstanding those shocks, it also needs to chart out a path. Nigeria as a country needs to chart out a path to realizing its potential. I mean, if you think of one of the points we made 6 months ago was that per capita incomes today in Nigeria on an inflation-adjusted basis are about what they were 4 decades ago in 1980. That cannot be the future going forward. So the importance of a recovery, not just from the recession of last year, but really in terms of realizing the full potential going forward so that you have growth picking up, and not just picking up, but accelerating. And that growth has to really trickle down to all Nigerians. So every single Nigerian has a chance at a better life.
Interested. Let's get some numbers behind this. Marco, it's good to see you once again. So in terms of how Nigeria ended the COVID-19 year on the macro side, give me some numbers, throw some numbers into some figures behind the facts that Shubham's talking about.
Good evening, Boason, and good evening to all your viewers. So in this edition of the Nigeria Development Update, when we see growth in comparative perspective, there are two messages that the report highlights. On the one hand side, that Nigeria has exited the recession. It declined, the economy contracted by 1.8% in 2020. We're projecting that it will recover by 1.8% of growth in 2021 and to 2.1% in 2022. So that is good news. However, that recovery is below the projected rate for sub-Saharan Africa. For example, this year alone, whereas we project that Nigeria will be recovering at 1.8%, we see that the rest of sub-Saharan Africa will be growing at about 3.4%. So there is more potential in the Nigerian economy in the recovery, and we see the close link between the implementation and the sustained implementation of reforms and the achievement of that potential. On the labor side, more people are working, but we do see that some of them may have been pushed to work because of the crisis. So people are hustling, people need to make a living, especially to recover from what happened during 2020. So not necessarily because more people are working, the situation is better, but we do see that linkage between what is happening at the macro level and also what people, ordinary Nigerians, are facing on a day-to-day basis.
Interested how these numbers come together, but let me just put this to Shubham. Was the outcome of the Nigerian economy in 2020 consistent or in line with your expectations at the World Bank?
I think, if you look at what we were projecting back in June of 2020, we were fearing that the outcome could have been a lot worse. 3.2%, a recession, a contraction of the economy of about 3.2%. The fact that that did not happen is actually great news. I mean, so in that sense, we were very happy to have been proven wrong, if you like. And I would say that was in large part due to a number of policies, the kind of the fiscal stance of the government, the kinds of policies that the government introduced in 2020. So I would say what happened was certainly our projections turned out to be not worse than what the reality turned out to be. But in terms of the directions in which we were hoping that the government would take the necessary steps, that was very much in line.
But again, Shubham, when you look at the 7 million Nigerians fell below the poverty line due to inflation, security problems has affected food production. Do you think enough is being done in those areas?
I think, this is why I said what I did earlier about the urgency of continuing with the reforms. I mean, the fact that the economy did not contract as much as we had feared does not mean that things were good for most Nigerians. It's just simply that things could have been a lot worse. And a lot of work remains to be done in terms of helping ordinary Nigerians rebuild their lives, rebuild their livelihoods, and then reach their aspirations.
Let's look forward into 2021 and the various engagements of the country with the World Bank. So, Marco, let's return to those macro or monetary policy side. The report talked about the credit crunch, which was avoided last year, the NPL in the Nigerian banks, the current account deficit, the monetary policy not consistent with prioritizing efforts to curb inflation. How difficult do you think it is for the central bank to manage inflation, exchange rate, and price stability, as it were, as its main objective here? Do you see this as a major item on the playbook for the rest of the year for Nigeria?
So first of all, I want to commend the authorities both on the monetary side and on the fiscal side for undertaking very bold reforms, often in the face of vocal opposition. And that includes, for instance, what the central bank has recently done on adopting the NAFEX rate, the rate at the investors and exporters window, as the anchor rate. And we believe that that would help to boost investor confidence, to boost the competitiveness of the economy. And if combined with also further measures to add more flexibility on the rate, I think that will set the foundations for a very strong recovery. In coordination with everything that the fiscal authorities are doing, both on mobilizing domestic revenues, on rationalizing expenditures at a time when much needed resources are needed to combat the pandemic, that coordination will be critical. We do highlight in the report the possibility or the option of establishing a more systematic coordination mechanism between fiscal and monetary policy. That is being done in a range of countries around the world with good success, and it is in that coordination where the communication is critically important, because going forward, choices will be difficult. We are in a situation that is unprecedented across the world, and it will require the support from all members of society, and that's why we believe that communication is essential for anything that the government does.
Okay, Shubham, your report stated that the 2020 virus pandemic will have lasting effects on poor and vulnerable Nigerian households. At what point do you think Nigeria can begin to lift some people out of the current poverty cycle?
Boason, both a simple and a complicated answer to that question is as soon as Nigeria chooses to. It really is Nigeria's choice. The potential is there. The resources can be directed towards that effort. Ultimately, it will be private firms that create the jobs by investing, and it's government that invests in the people. Make sure every Nigerian child has an education, has the right health care. So these are the things that lead to sustained poverty reduction. This is what the global experience suggests. And it's in many ways, these are simple things in terms of what needs to be done. What's often complicated is generating the consensus around that and actually implementing it. So I think we see in Nigeria absolutely has the potential to lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty within, by 2030, as His Excellency President Buhari said. But, that choice, that decision to start acting right now needs to be Nigeria's choice. It is Nigeria's choice.
Yes, it is Nigeria's choice, but the World Bank in Nigeria is having current engagements with the Nigerian authorities for a new program of about 5-year period. Does this latest report fit into that current engagement, development engagement you're having with the Nigerian authorities? Bring us up to speed.
Yes. There are certainly, if you look at the last section where we spotlight two of the critical areas for Nigeria, power sector reforms as well as domestic revenue mobilization. These are areas where we're deeply engaged with government partners, both at the federal and at the subnational level. Beyond that, it isn't highlighted so clearly as part of a program, our program in the report. But, in the last 18 months, our board has approved around $6 billion in new concessional financing for Nigeria. Now, for us to be actively able to start disbursing that, we're still waiting for approval by the National Assembly of the borrowing plan, etc. But what are these programs in support of? Things like water and sanitation, primary health care, keeping adolescent girls in school, the Nigeria Cares program, which is being implemented by the states to help households, firms recover from the COVID crisis. Programs like SIFTAS, which is State Fiscal Transparency, Accountability, and Sustainability, that's trying to help the states turn around their fiscal position so that they can in turn both be more accountable to their citizens, to the electorate, but also be able to deliver more by having the necessary fiscal resources. So the basic agenda, the development agenda that, the list of things that Nigeria needs to do, this is what we are here to support on. And that's where a lot of our financing is aligned towards that. And a lot of our, advice and ideas based on what worked in other countries is also aligned on that. The key aim at the end of all of this is eliminating poverty and making lives better for the bottom half. I mean, that's our simple mission.
Shubham, Nigeria is gasping for breath right now, in a manner of speaking. Shubham, sorry, my key question very quickly is that you talked about the $6 billion that has been approved by the World Bank for Nigeria. Has there been a drawdown on this amount? When was it approved? And what is causing the delay? You spoke about the National Assembly. What would you like to see? Is this a budgetary support funding?
No, we have different modalities. This funding is for all those things that I mentioned. These are much more targeted funding. So for power sector recovery, for keeping adolescent girls in school, for making sure that water and sanitation is available to Nigerians all across in multiple states. This funding is there. It's been approved by our board for us, and the plans in terms of how these would be spent by the government agencies that are implementing, that's already what we're waiting for at the moment. And I believe a lot of this is in the National Assembly right now for approval by the National Assembly that this is, even though it's concessional, it is borrowing by Nigeria from an external source, which happens to be the World Bank, that this borrowing makes sense in terms of Nigeria's overall development priorities. As soon as that approval comes, and it has come for a couple of the operations, we're ready to hit the ground running.
What type of funding here, Marco, on the World Bank side, do you think will help Nigeria lift its exchange rate problems or very tight liquidity on the FX side right now?
So the central bank is the authority that will call all the shots when it comes to exchange rate management and exchange rate policy. What we do from the World Bank side is to support the policies that we believe will help to lift 100 million people out of poverty over the next 10 years. That's our core mandate. That's all the policies and all the programs that Shubham just highlighted. We have been supporting Nigeria for years, and we very much would like to continue to do so. And we are there on the ground and helping to bring international experience. But on that front, I think that it's really about Nigeria's choice. It's about the choice that all citizens will need to take forward, to push and to sustain, because right now to achieve Nigeria's potential is not just up to one government. This would require sustained action for subsequent governments. So it's important that the citizenship also takes that in their own role, so that they can monitor programs and they can also suggest improvements going forward. And as well, the private sector has a big role to play in that regard too.
On a final note, Shubham, let's go back to what can be considered right now as the headline issue for Nigeria, which is insecurity. And this is what we started the program with MTN issuing a statement about the service disruption in Nigeria. This is the first company to acknowledge a possible disruption to its service due to insecurity in Nigeria. And the MTN says, well, because of rising insecurity in different parts of the country, service delivery may be delayed. Technical support team may not be able to get to sites and achieve optimum turnaround in fault management as quickly as possible. Is the World Bank extremely worried right now about this level of insecurity? And that's in your report as well, because you talk about instability, violence, slowing economic growth, job creation, and turning things into a vicious cycle. Exact words.
Yeah, and the example you gave is exactly the sort of vicious cycle that can kick in, where the lack of economic opportunities contributes to increased criminality and insecurity, because people will try to find a way of getting by however they can, and if criminality offers an option, that's the way they will go. And then that in turn makes it more difficult for businesses and firms to operate. And that then weighs on the economic growth potential of the country. So that's the vicious cycle that is starting to materialize, take shape in Nigeria, but it can be broken. And it can be broken with the right policies that free up the space for private investments. Obviously, it also needs action on the security front. And that obviously has to be the first priority. But with it, for that to be sustained, you need progress on the economic reforms so that the jobs are there, the economic opportunities are there.
Let me try and break it down for the last 1 minute, Shubham. In other words, you believe Nigeria's insecurity goes all the way down to social macroeconomic issue or problems.
Yes, it is not the only cause, and then in different geopolitical zones, there may be other more local factors, obviously, but the lack of economic opportunity is one of the key elements driving the increased insecurity.
Well, thank you both for your insights tonight on the latest development report on Nigeria. Shubham Chudhuri, thank you so much, World Bank Country Director for Nigeria, and Marco Hernandez, the lead economist. Thank you very much. We hope to see you next time. Give me some key macro variables that you went into this particular report for this current year, 2021. We're right now in the middle of the year.
We were discussing how Nigeria has exited a recession on the growth side, and that's good news. Now, the not so good news is that inflation, it's very high right now, and it has been rising steadily since August 2019, when the government closed its land borders. So inflation is particularly important. That's a key macroeconomic variable that we highlight in the report, because it reduces the purchasing power of ordinary Nigerians. Just to give you one example, right? A year ago in April 2020, with 1,000 naira, a household was able to buy 6 kilograms of maize. Today, they can only buy 4 kilograms of maize. So that is a very real statement, and it has been translating into all the economy, and of course, it's something that we care about a lot. Now, just to highlight those linkages, Shubham already mentioned how inflation is resulting into higher poverty, and what we wanted also to highlight in the report are other indicators that are non-monetary. So let me give you one example, and that's food insecurity. A year ago, before COVID, you had around 6% of between 6 to 7% of Nigerian households that had an adult that went without eating for an entire day. That's a very significant number. However, today that number has reached to over 18%. So 18% of households where you have an adult that went without eating for an entire day. And I think that highlights the importance of understanding that all macroeconomic indicators do have also a particular linkage about on the micro side on what people face on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, Marco. So this report, the report says inflationary pressures is beginning to persist at least for the next 6 months and will exceed 16% in 2021. Today we got the Statistics Office releasing inflation at about 17%, north of 17%. So you think inflation is going to remain highly elevated until the end of the year, 2021?
What we do see is that inflationary pressures are expected to go down during the end of the second quarter, the third quarter of 2021. That's good. However, with inflation at above 15% or even 10%, it is still outside of the target that the government wants to have. And of course, the higher the level of inflation, the faster that purchasing power is eroded. So what we highlight in the report is the importance of implemented a series of linked policies on the trade side, on the monetary side, on the fiscal side, also to address not only the factors that are increasing the supply of food, which do include measures or things that have happened for some time now, like insecurity, but also to make sure that the price of food is cheaper for people. And you know, the issue of trade is an important one to highlight, because we do see a very clear indication that the closure of land borders and other trade restrictions have had a negative effect when it comes to the price of food.
There are a few optimistic sound bites in this report. Shubham, the country director, give me your list of fiscal considerations for Nigeria on this very slippery road to stronger recovery. For example, the report says current account deficit for Nigeria will narrow to about 5% of GDP. How do you think Nigeria will be able to achieve this, looking at the entire macroeconomic environment right now?
So let me begin with, on the fiscal side, I think the priorities are clear and the government is fully aware of this. Number one priority is mobilizing revenues. This is the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative. Nigeria has about the lowest revenue to GDP ratio of any country in the world. It's about 8% in a good year. It was much lower last year. So, and without the revenues, the government does not have the fiscal resources to truly invest in people, in the human capital, in the critical infrastructure, and in security, the basic law and order functions. So I would say priority number one is mobilizing revenues and doing so in a way that is seen to be fair and as acceptable to ordinary Nigerians. Priority number two on the fiscal side is to redirect expenditures from expenditures that only benefit a few to expenditures that will benefit the many, and in particular the poor, who are about half of the population. And what's the number one priority for redirecting expenditures? PMS subsidies. PMS subsidies are about 100 billion naira a month right now, given the price of oil. And if the price of oil continues to go up, PMS, the 100 billion naira will also grow. And this is 100 billion naira that could be coming into the Federation account and then be redirected towards, name your favorite cause. Could be primary health care, could be basic education, could be a rural road. But that's not coming in right now. And these subsidies are benefiting largely a small segment of the population at the top. And so these are the kinds of fiscal choices, and electricity tariffs would be another one. The cost of having electricity tariffs remain below what it costs to provide the power. So these are the choices on the fiscal side that I think the government is very aware of and took some bold moves, steps on in 2020. We are very hopeful that on this front that we will see further progress, and that trade-off, and essentially it's a contract to take the fiscal resources that are being used on these kinds of subsidies, redirecting them towards pro-poor expenditures that benefit the many.
Shubham, what are you strongly optimistic about in your projections for Nigeria in 2021? Give me the strongest point.
I think on the government's management of its fiscal situation. It will be a very tough ride, but I think progress on these reforms are what I personally am most optimistic about.
I want Marco to take me through some of the recommendations, looking at the to-do list in a manner of speaking on both the fiscal side and on the side of the monetary side, on the central bank. I saw in your report that there's a need for Nigeria to set up what you called fiscal and monetary coordination council. That sounds very interesting to me, while you knock the central bank around a little bit when it comes to exchange rate. So my question, Marco, is this. Give me your headline point here when it comes to the monetary side of immediate priorities for the Nigerian authorities.
So we believe that the immediate priority is to reduce inflation and to do so in a way that it promotes economic growth going forward so that the recovery continues at the same time that we protect the poor. There are millions of Nigerians right now that are living in poverty or very close to the poverty line, and they're being heavily affected by what's happening on inflation. So that is the immediate priority. What we highlight in the Nigeria Development Update is a series of 6 areas that, if combined, will not only help to reduce inflation, but doing so in a way that also ensures sustained recovery. And that includes improvements in exchange rate management, improvements in fiscal management, in monetary policy, the trade aspect that I highlighted before. It's critical. And to do so, those policies in combination with policies that would help to ensure the protection of the poor, for example, through conditional cash transfer programs that are targeted and that are well defined, and also a specifically targeted support to micro and small enterprises that right now are also facing difficulties, for example, accessing credit. So just to give you a few examples, I think there is a role to play from the fiscal authority side, from the central bank, very important role to play there, and also on the role that the private sector and development partners can also play in support, in coordination, and in collaboration and communication of these reforms to the public. Many of these are sensitive in nature. Shubham already highlighted the gasoline subsidy, the electricity tariff reform. These are things that we believe have to happen in order to create fiscal space that is much needed to combat the pandemic, but are also things that will require a broad consensus so that they can be sustained across time. I want to commend the central bank for the recent move that they have on the unification of exchange rate. They have adopted the NAFEX rate, which is the rate at the investors and exporters window, as their anchor rate. This is very important, and we believe that it would help to boost the competitiveness of the economy, and also it will help to reduce inflation. But at the same time, we do see an opportunity to keep going forward, not only on the monetary side, but across all policy areas.